General Townsend, could you walk us through what you think China is doing in Africa?
Now, China has invested heavily in Africa over the past decade.
How does it threaten us, and what are we doing to address it?
China has made a decision, a deliberate decision to compete with America and Africa and win that competition.
I'm leading my country to break free from the US dollar's control. With China's new payment system, Africa will shape its own economic future.
China is a key partner of African nations in terms of trade and investment.
China has long been a major trade and investment partner for African nations. But now, Beijing is expanding its role, moving decisively into Africa's defense sector. This shift is especially clear in the Sahel region, where Chinese weapons and artillery are becoming increasingly common on the battlefield. The latest example comes from Burkina Faso. The country's armed forces have just received a large shipment of advanced Chinese military equipment, armored vehicles, rocket launchers, and heavy artillery, all now stationed on Burkinabe soil. Once reliant on France and the United States for military support, Burkina Faso is now turning east. This pivot could change the nature of conflict in the Sahel, a region already marked by decades of insurgency and instability. So why now? And what does this mean for Burkina Faso's fight and Africa's future? Let's take a closer look. In August 2025, the usually quiet streets of Ouagadougou were disrupted by the arrival of heavy military convoys. New Chinese armored vehicles, artillery systems, and rocket launchers rolled into the country's military bases under tight security. This was no rumor or propaganda. Verified footage quickly confirmed the delivery. Rows of VN-22B fire support vehicles, PLL-05 self-propelled gun mortars, and SR-5 multiple rocket launchers, each painted in desert and jungle camouflage. Burkinabe soldiers stood alongside these machines as engineers prepared them for deployment. For Burkina Faso, this shipment was more than just new equipment. It was a clear sign of a strategic shift away from Western military aid and toward a new era. At the center of this delivery was the VN-22B, a six-wheeled armored vehicle. It's designed to withstand direct hits from armor-piercing rounds and is equipped with a stabilized 30mm autocannon capable of targeting fast-moving enemies with precision, even while on the move. This technology transforms how Burkinabe forces can respond to ambushes in the challenging terrain of the Sahel. Until recently, Burkina Faso's frontline operations relied heavily on pickup trucks and aging carriers. The arrival of the VN-22B marks a significant upgrade. Alongside these vehicles were PLL-05 gun mortars, hybrid systems that can function both as mortars and cannons. Commanders can now shell insurgent hideouts from a distance and quickly switch to direct fire if militants close in. This flexibility was previously unavailable, offering a tactical edge long sought by Burkinabe forces. Perhaps most striking were the SR-5 multiple rocket launchers, capable of firing guided and unguided rockets up to 70 kilometers away. For the first time, Burkina Faso has a credible long-range strike capability. Insurgents who once found safety in remote bases now face the threat of precision-guided rockets raining down from afar. This development could shift the psychological balance on the battlefield just as much as the physical firepower. This shipment is part of a larger trend. Earlier deliveries included mine-resistant, ambush-protected vehicles, armored personnel carriers, and heavy logistics trucks, all building the foundation for modern military operations. But the August 2025 delivery stood out in scale, sophistication, and visibility. Unlike previous shipments that arrived quietly, this one was shown openly, signaling to both domestic and international audiences that Burkina Faso is no longer fighting with outdated equipment. It is rearming with cutting-edge tools. The timing is critical. Western military aid has been shrinking. France has withdrawn many of its forces, and the United States has reduced its footprint. International promises of support have failed to translate into weapons on the ground. Into this gap stepped China, not with words, but with convoys of advanced hardware. Where the West retreats, Beijing advances. Yet new weapons alone do not guarantee success. Advanced systems require training, new tactics, and logistical support to be effective. If not properly integrated, these assets risk becoming trophies rather than game changers. However, China appears committed not only to supplying weapons but also to providing training and ongoing support. For Burkina Faso, this influx of modern weaponry marks a turning point. An army once seen as overstretched and under-equipped now holds capabilities that rival or surpass many neighboring forces. Militants who once struck vulnerable convoys may soon face heavily armored columns equipped with rapid-fire autocannons and long-range rockets. Still, firepower alone may not be enough to change the course of the conflict. To understand why Burkina Faso urgently needed this transformation, we must look at the decade-long insurgency that has ravaged the country. Since 2015, militant groups have turned large parts of Burkina Faso into war zones. Villages have been burned, government outposts overrun, and millions forced to flee their homes. By 2024, nearly 2 million Burkinabe had been displaced, creating one of Africa's largest humanitarian crises. The Burkinabe army, stretched thin and poorly equipped, often struggled to respond. Militants, using motorbikes and pickup trucks, struck quickly and vanished before security forces could react. Outdated rifles, aging armored carriers, and scattered artillery were no match for these agile insurgents. Every time the army seemed to regain ground, militants shifted tactics, forcing soldiers into a reactive stance rather than allowing them to take the initiative. This is why the new Chinese systems are more than just weapons. They are lifelines. Each one addresses a critical weakness on the battlefield. The VN-22B fire support vehicles, for example, allow soldiers to respond immediately to ambushes. Convoys no longer have to be vulnerable targets. These armored platforms provide protection while delivering heavy firepower with precision. In a conflict where attacks often happen on the move, this combination of mobility and firepower can mean the difference between defeat and control. The PLL-05 gun mortars solve another challenge: flexibility. Insurgents hide in dense forests or fortified compounds, making them difficult to dislodge with small arms. Traditional mortars could fire on these positions but left crews exposed and were slow to adapt to changing battle conditions. With the PLL-05, commanders can bombard enemy positions from a safe distance and shift to direct fire as the fight moves closer. This allows Burkinabe forces to dictate the pace of battle, rather than constantly reacting to militants. Then there are the SR-5 rocket systems, possibly the most transformative. Militants have long relied on the vast, ungoverned spaces of rural Burkina Faso as safe havens. With rockets capable of striking targets 70 kilometers away, these sanctuaries are no longer out of reach. Guided munitions enable precision strikes on insurgent camps, training grounds, and supply caches. This changes not only military strategy but also the psychological dynamics. Insurgents can no longer assume safety just because they operate beyond patrol routes. The urgency of these acquisitions also reflects a morale issue. For years, Burkinabe soldiers fought knowing they were outgunned and sent into impossible battles. This sense of futility damaged unit cohesion and discipline. The arrival of advanced weaponry does more than increase firepower. It restores confidence. It signals that the government is investing in its troops and believes in the possibility of victory. In conflicts like this, morale can be as decisive as firepower. But this raises a crucial question. Why did Burkina Faso turn to China rather than its traditional Western partners? For decades, Burkina Faso's security was closely tied to France. The country was a key part of France's military presence in the Sahel, relying on French advisors, trainers, and weapons to fight insurgents. But this dependency came with conditions. France often linked military support to political loyalty, economic concessions, and acceptance of its broader influence. As insurgencies spread and French forces failed to deliver lasting stability, resentment boiled over. By 2022, mass protests filled Ouagadougou's streets, demanding an end to French influence. Eventually, French troops were expelled, and with them went the security guarantees that had anchored Burkina Faso's defense posture for decades. The United States might have been expected to fill the void, but Washington's approach was more cautious. While it provided intelligence and occasional support, Its involvement was increasingly focused on counterinsurgency priorities rather than the existential needs of local governments. Burkinabe leaders criticized U.S. assistance for coming with heavy conditions, emphasis on governance reforms, oversight mechanisms, and strict rules on how aid could be used. For a government facing daily insurgent attacks, these delays and caveats were luxuries they could not afford. This is where China emerged as a clear alternative. Unlike Western partners, Beijing attaches no political strings to its arms deals. It does not demand reforms or tie deliveries to election timelines. Instead, China offers speed, volume, and financial flexibility. For Captain Ibrahim Traore's government, which prides itself on sovereignty and independence, China's approach was far more appealing. Where the West spoke of democracy and accountability, China simply delivered weapons. But this shift wasn't just about convenience, it carried deep symbolic weight. By turning to Beijing, Ouagadougou made a deliberate statement. Burkina Faso was no longer willing to be a client state of the West. It was asserting its right to choose partners based on national interest rather than colonial legacy. The visibility of the Chinese convoys reinforced this symbolism. Unlike Western arms transfers, often quiet and limited in scale, the August 2025 shipment was rolled out openly, photographed, broadcast, and widely publicized across the region. This wasn't just a weapons delivery, it was a flag planted in the shifting geopolitical sands of the Sahel. The timing also reflects a broader regional trend. Mali and Niger, both struggling with similar insurgencies, have pivoted away from France. Mali has openly embraced Russian military contractors, while Niger explores options with Turkey and China. Together, these three nations form a bloc increasingly defining itself as post-Western. By equipping Burkina Faso with modern systems, Beijing positions itself at the center of this realignment, using arms sales as the currency of influence. But for China, this deal goes far beyond Burkina Faso itself. It is part of a long-term strategy to deepen ties with Africa, not just through trade and infrastructure projects, but through defense and security cooperation. Arms sales open doors to training programs, maintenance contracts, and lasting military partnerships. These arrangements bind African armies to Chinese supply chains, creating dependency not on Paris or Washington, but on Beijing. Every rocket launcher and armored vehicle delivered is also a relationship forged, one that shifts the balance of influence in the Sahel away from the West. Burkina Faso's decision, then, was not only about survival on the battlefield. It was about sovereignty, about aligning with partners who respect its choices rather than dictate them. Yet this raises another practical question. How does a country with one of the lowest GDPs per capita in the world pay for such sophisticated military systems? The answer lies not in ideology, but in the creative financial and political arrangements underpinning the deal. A story that reveals how far both sides are willing to go to secure their interests. Burkina Faso's economy is fragile. With high unemployment, widespread displacement, and limited resources, the image of Chinese armored convoys rolling into Ouagadougou raises eyebrows. How can a country in such economic distress afford an arsenal like this? China structures its deals with flexibility. Unlike Western suppliers who often demand cash up front and enforce strict repayment schedules, Beijing offers a variety of financing options. For Burkina Faso, this likely includes a combination of deferred payments, concessional loans, and barter-style arrangements tied to future natural resource revenues. This model allows a government under pressure to secure weapons today while spreading the financial burden into the future. Gold is at the center of these arrangements. Burkina Faso ranks among Africa's top gold producers, and gold revenues are the country's primary source of foreign exchange. Analysts believe Ouagadougou may have pledged a share of future gold exports as collateral for the arms deal. By tying repayment to resources rather than cash transfers, the government ensures it can acquire immediate firepower without emptying its treasury. This financing approach is not new. China has employed similar models in Angola and the Democratic Republic of Congo, where infrastructure and arms projects were secured against oil and mineral revenues. These resource-backed deals provide China with long-term leverage, while offering partner countries a way to access critical military hardware despite cash flow constraints. But they also raise questions about dependency and sovereignty down the line. For Burkina Faso, the promise of upgraded defense capabilities comes with a complex web of financial obligations. Each shipment of weapons is tied to future exports, potentially locking the country into long-term agreements that influence more than just military affairs. As the Sahel's security landscape evolves, these financial arrangements could become a significant factor in shaping Burkina Faso's economic and political future. The Chinese approach, speed, scale, and resource-backed financing, offers a stark contrast to the cautious, conditional aid typical of Western partners. It is a model designed for rapid impact and deep influence. At the same time, this approach is not without risk. Resource prices fluctuate, and political instability could complicate repayment schedules. Burkina Faso's leadership must navigate these challenges while trying to strengthen its military capacity. The question remains, can this new relationship deliver the stability the country desperately needs? For now, the arrival of Chinese weaponry signals a decisive break with the past and a new chapter in Burkina Faso's struggle against insurgency. The convoy's presence is a visible sign that the country is betting on a different future, one defined less by old alliances and more by pragmatic partnerships tailored to immediate security needs. As Burkina Faso steps into this new reality, the eyes of the region and the world are watching closely. Another possibility is the use of what economists term concessional arms loans, financing arrangements where repayment schedules are deliberately stretched over decades. Interest rates remain exceptionally low, and penalties for delayed payments are minimal or even non-existent. This kind of financial leniency is not a gesture of charity from Beijing, but a calculated and strategic investment in its long-term geopolitical ambitions. By easing the immediate financial burden on Burkina Faso, China ensures that the country remains a committed partner, tightly bound to Chinese supply chains for everything from spare parts to essential maintenance and ongoing military training programs. Once Burkina Faso's armed forces become reliant on Chinese military hardware, the cost and complexity of switching to alternative suppliers increase dramatically, effectively locking the country into a long-term relationship with Beijing. The intricate integration of systems, from rocket launchers to armored vehicles, creates a dependency that is both practical and strategic. However, despite this strong partnership with China, Burkina Faso is careful not to place all its eggs in a single basket. Captain Ibrahim Traore's government has been actively pursuing military agreements with other international partners to diversify its arsenal and reduce potential overdependence on one supplier. Deals with Turkey for advanced drones, negotiations with Egypt for armored vehicles, and efforts to boost local production capabilities for light armored units are all part of a deliberate policy aimed at spreading risk and enhancing strategic autonomy. This diversification strategy serves multiple purposes. Firstly, it prevents Burkina Faso from becoming overly dependent on any single external actor, preserving its maneuverability on the international stage. Secondly, by demonstrating that it has multiple options, Ouagadougou strengthens its negotiating position, compelling each supplier to offer more favorable financial terms and conditions. Thus, the Chinese arms deal is not an isolated transaction, but a crucial component of a wider strategy based on supplier competition. Critics of these arrangements argue that they carry significant risks, warning that Burkina Faso may be mortgaging its future by locking itself into long-term repayment obligations that could severely constrain its sovereignty and economic flexibility. These skeptics fear that the country's already fragile economy could be further strained by debt service, limiting its ability to invest in other critical areas like health, education, and infrastructure. Supporters, however, present a contrasting view. They insist that the urgency of the security crisis, marked by villages falling to insurgents, demoralized soldiers, and porous borders, demands immediate action. For them, the immediate cost of inaction, including the potential collapse of the state, vastly outweighs the deferred financial obligations of these loans. In this brutal calculus, survival today takes precedence over abstract economic concerns that might arise years down the line. There is also a critical domestic political dimension to the Chinese arms deal. By securing a steady flow of modern weaponry through flexible financial arrangements, the Trudeau government bolsters its internal legitimacy and public standing. Citizens witnessing convoys of new equipment arriving at military bases perceive tangible proof of the government's commitment to national defense. Soldiers, in turn, gain access to upgraded tools and technology that could boost morale and effectiveness on the battlefield. Moreover, this visible rearmament sends a strong political message both domestically and internationally. Burkina Faso is no longer a passive recipient of Western aid or abandonment, but an active player charting its own course. The deal, therefore, functions as much as a political statement as an economic or military transaction, reinforcing the government's image as capable and sovereign. This financial and strategic creativity points us toward a much larger picture. If China can provide advanced arms on credit, secured by natural resource guarantees and delivered rapidly, then Burkina Faso is not simply buying weapons, it is buying into a new model of international relations. A model where Beijing, not Paris or Washington, defines the rules of engagement and sets the terms of partnership. This realization brings us to the critical, overarching question. What does this shift mean for the future of the Sahel and Africa as a whole? Will the inflow of Chinese arms stabilize the region by strengthening national militaries and deterring insurgents? Or will it create a new kind of dependency under a different global patron, replacing old chains with new ones? This debate is rapidly shaping the next chapter in the Sahel's turbulent story. The arrival of Chinese weaponry in Burkina Faso signifies far more than a military upgrade for one country. It reverberates across the entire region. For years, the Sahel was defined by Western interventions, particularly France's Operation Barkhane, and the broader security architecture led by Western powers. Now, that landscape is undergoing a profound transformation, being dismantled and replaced by something far less predictable and distinctly multipolar. Burkina Faso's growing alignment with China marks the clearest sign yet that the Sahel is no longer content to exist as a passive Western sphere of influence. The most immediate consequence of this shift will be on the regional balance of power. Neighboring Mali has deepened its reliance on Russian Wagner mercenaries. Niger, following political upheaval, has begun exploring partnerships with Turkey and China, especially in drone technology and arms procurement. With Burkina Faso now openly deploying Chinese rocket systems and armored vehicles, a new bloc is taking shape. Sahelian states that have rejected traditional Western patrons in favor of diversified non-Western alliances. Together, these countries are experimenting with a new form of sovereignty, one that seeks to secure their own futures without Western tutelage or dependence. This emerging reality poses profound challenges for Western capitals. France, once the uncontested security guarantor in the Sahel, now finds its credibility deeply eroded. The United States, while still present via intelligence sharing and drone bases, is increasingly viewed as cautious and reactive rather than proactive or fully committed. China's entry into the Sahel highlights a glaring vacuum: the West's inability or unwillingness to provide fast, decisive support precisely when African states needed it most. In contrast, Beijing has demonstrated an ability to deliver modern military equipment quickly and in large volumes, reshaping battlefield dynamics almost overnight. This operational efficiency carries enormous symbolic weight. For insurgent groups, which have long thrived on the perception that state forces are weak and ill-equipped, the introduction of long-range rockets, stabilized autocannons, and hybrid mortar systems threatens to fundamentally alter the strategic calculus. Militants will likely adapt, perhaps dispersing into smaller units or increasing their use of civilian shields. But they can no longer assume that rural sanctuaries are safe from swift and powerful retaliation. The psychological balance of fear on the battlefield may begin to tilt back toward the state, shifting momentum in ways that could have profound implications for regional security. Yet, the consequences of Burkina Faso's pivot to China are not confined to military hardware alone. They signal a broader shift in African agency and self-determination. For decades, African nations were told that their security and prosperity hinged on Western benevolence and alignment. Now, Ouagadougou is demonstrating that alternatives exist, that sovereignty means having the freedom to choose diverse partners based on interest and pragmatism, rather than legacy ties. Across the continent, other governments will be watching closely. Should Chinese arms help Burkina Faso reclaim territory and stabilize parts of its territory, the model may well spread, becoming the foundation for a new wave of cooperation that extends beyond defense into infrastructure, technology, and governance. Such developments could deepen China's influence across Africa in ways that are both economic and strategic. At the same time, this shift carries inherent risks. Dependency on a new patron, even one as pragmatic and non-interventionist as Beijing, could replicate the vulnerabilities African states seek to escape. If Burkina Faso's repayment is tied to gold exports, economic shocks or fluctuations in commodity prices could give China substantial leverage over national policy decisions. Critics also caution that an exclusive focus on heavy weaponry risks neglecting the underlying drivers of conflict: poverty, marginalization, governance failures, and social fragmentation. While advanced rockets and armored vehicles can kill militants, they cannot rebuild trust between the state and its citizens, or address the root causes of insurgency. Nonetheless, for Burkina Faso's leaders, the calculus remains starkly pragmatic. Survival today outweighs hypothetical risks in the future. In their view, the partnership with China is not a new form of dependency, but an assertion of choice: the ability to diversify alliances, reject old hierarchies, and redefine sovereignty on African terms. It is less about swapping one external master for another, and more about refusing to remain vulnerable while waiting for Western powers to determine their fate. This moment, then, transcends Burkina Faso alone. It is about a region at a crossroads. Should the influx of Chinese arms succeed in helping Burkina Faso regain territory and confidence, it may spark a wave of similar deals, firmly establishing China as a central actor in African security. If it fails, skepticism will deepen regarding the ability of any external partner, Western or Eastern, to solve the Sahel's enduring crisis. But one fact is undeniable: the Sahel is no longer a passive stage for Western geopolitical experiments. By embracing Beijing's weapons, Ouagadougou has sent a powerful signal that Africa is ready to chart its own course. Even if that path unsettles old powers, the Chinese convoys rolling through Burkina Faso are delivering more than firepower. They are delivering a message. A new era has begun, and the rules of the game are being rewritten in Africa itself, not in Paris or Washington. Has Burkina Faso just triggered the biggest power shift in the Sahel's modern history? Will Chinese weaponry finally turn the tide against insurgencies? Let us know your thoughts in the comments section. Thank you for watching, and until the next video, stay tuned.